Hi, my name is Ian Kinder. I'm with Live Safe Academy. And today we're going to talk about a very important topic, and that's home defense. And this is actually going to be a two-part series. What we're going to talk about today is how to prevent home invasions, how to be prepared for home invasions, what can you do if, God forbid, your home is broken into. And we're going to discuss this from the perspective of everything except guns. So we're going to talk about things like lighting. We're going to talk about how to make your house a more difficult target to break into. And then on the follow up show, we're going to talk about how people who own guns can use those guns to make their family more safe. The reason why we're doing that is because not everybody owns guns. And so we want to make sure that we start this show with something that's going to apply to everybody. And then we'll follow up with information that will help those people that specifically own guns and want to learn how to use those guns to keep their family more safe. Now, I'm going to be here today with Lou Chiodo. Lou Chiodo is a guest that I have on many of my shows. He's a phenomenal person to talk about these issues because he has a lot of real world experience. And I'm sure he's going to share a lot of that real world experience in this program today. I'm also going to end up talking about a lot of the scenes that I've worked because there's a lot of things that I've seen at these various scenes, real home invasions for people lost their lives. And there's a lot of lessons there that people can learn so they don't have to end up being a victim. Before I do all of that, though, I want to remind you that you can help us help you and help other people too by doing a couple really simple but very important things. So, as an example, this show spreads by people letting people know about us and also getting into the search engines. You've had a guest on my show named Paul, and he's got a YouTube channel called Apex Mindset. And just like me, he's been plugging away and plugging away and plugging away, but he's got a head start on me. He's a very talented guy. And he finally reached to the point where his show got in the search engines. He had a video that went viral. He's picking up a lot of subscribers, and I couldn't be more proud of him because he's helped so many people. And of course, a lot of people that watch our videos, listen to our podcast, you're probably familiar with active protection. John and I actually started doing similar videos about the same time. And when we did them, we didn't know one another. We just happened to be approaching things the same way. Our series was called Real Encounters. And we didn't pursue that because I focused on my local classes here in the Detroit, Michigan area. But John went on to pick up millions of subscribers. And I don't know John personally, but I know him well enough to say he's a very good person. And I could not be more proud of what he's accomplished. And I know he's got a heart for helping people too. Well, we're in that process now too. And in order for us to get our message out to people, we need you guys to help us. And you can do that in simple ways. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can like our videos. You can share our videos with other people. You can subscribe to our podcast. You can share our podcast with other people, and you can leave us reviews. And what that does is that helps us get into the search engines. And once we get into the search engines, then we're not just putting this material out for people who already know about us, but now we'll have the ability to reach other people too. And that's where we can make the most profound difference. So we're asking you guys, help us get out the word. If you feel this information is helpful, we're very grateful for that. And then always go to the video description or the podcast description and click on the link called livesafeacademy.com/connect. And that will take you to our website where you'll have access to all of our podcasts, our videos, our articles, our in-person classes here in the Detroit, Michigan area, and our live virtual classes that you can participate in from anywhere in the world. And we already have people that are following our material and taking our live virtual classes, not only from states all around the US, but now we've had students from many other countries too, and people that are following our podcasts, our videos, our articles from other countries too. So we're very proud of that, but we're in our infancy stage. We need you guys to help us grow, get us into the search engines so we can help more people too. Now let's get into the meat of this topic, and I'm going to be introducing one of those few men that I call teacher, my Mr. Miyagi, if you will, somebody that has been guiding me for many years. And this is somebody who has a lot of real world experience. And this is why I bring him onto the show. He was an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. He spent 23 years as a trooper in the California the Highway Patrol, which is our nation's largest state agency. Sorry. He worked right on the Mexican border. He worked the graveyard shift. He's been to home invasions in progress, which I'm sure he'll share some of those stories too. And he was on the front lines of the LA riots. So you couldn't ask for a more knowledgeable guest. You also couldn't ask for somebody that was more dedicated to help other people, which is why I bring him on this show. So Lou, Thank you very much for being a part of this show. And can you give us a little bit about a brief background? I know we do this every show, but not everybody knows who you are. And then once you do this, kind of lay out how we're going to approach this subject today, because home defense, I mean, I've been to many scenes where people have lost their lives. I know you've helped people during home invasions. This is a life and death issue, and we want to help people to be safe in the worst possible circumstances.
Well, good morning, Ian, and good morning to everybody watching. One of the things that I would say is that I started off as a martial artist, so I got pretty familiar with the self-defense concept of things. I've continued through life doing the martial arts program, uh, approximately 57 years doing that. I was accepted in a Marine Corps commissioning program, which brought me to approximately 10 years of a service in the regular Marine Corps. There we learned a lot of things about tactics, about how to set things up so that you have a better chance of winning. And I'll allude to that a little bit in a while when I give more of the presentation. I went into law enforcement, spent 23 years there. And the neat thing about there is everything is real time, real world, and you don't really get a chance to do things twice because it's got to be done right the first time. So for me, I've been called upon to have to respond to active shooter type incidents, home invasion incidents, and you learn a lot about the way people responded to them, about what maybe things could have been done better to have prevented it or made it better for them. And we'll discuss some of those things as we go along. To kind of preface that, I would probably say that the three main things I would talk about is early warnings, so that we have an idea something is going on. The other thing is, particularly for hours of darkness, nighttime issues, lighting in the home and how that can help us. And also obstacles or ways that we can harden the environment we're living in to make it a little bit easier for us and more difficult for the bad guys to be able to get to us.
I think that's a great way to break this down in a systematic way to help people understand it. And I can already see this. We're going to have a lot of spinoffs on the show, because with any one of those topics, we can really dedicate a show to get down into the details. So we want to kind of run that balance where we're being informative, but we're also being concise, because otherwise we could be here for a long time. So why don't you pick one topic that you want to start with first? Let's kind of explore that aspect of it, and then we'll just kind of build on from there.
Well, sure. I think probably the most opportune way to start this is to talk about early warning. When I was first starting to deal with this topic years ago, I had kind of a flash in my mind that says, this is very similar to the way we would set up a defensive position in a Marine Corps operation. And an early warning becomes a very critical component of that, because there's a real important concept I want to get across, and that is defending against something that you don't even see coming becomes far more difficult, because now you have very little prep time as far as from when you realize something is going on to actually having to implement a plan to counterattack it. So early warning is going to be a very, very critical part of this overall thing that we're talking about. So how do we get early warning? Well, one of the first things that we'd always advise people to do is get some kind of a alarm system for your house. And the reason being is that at least the entry points to the house could be covered, so that if they are breached, you at least are going to know that something is going on because your alarm goes off. One of the things that I could also say that might be helpful is to have a system that can be broadcast to the alarm company, as opposed to being over a landline, but over a cell type system. So that for some reason, if your landline got disabled by someone trying to get in the house, at least the signal can go out. The other thing is that a lot of the systems have a battery backup, so that if someone were to cut off your power supply, the system will still be able to work for you. So, as part of a beginning of an early warning system, I would say that an alarm system really helps. The other thing that I think is important about an alarm system is, if it's advertised on the exterior of your house that you have an alarm, many people that are going to do break-ins or some kind of a home invasion scenario may think twice of wanting to come to your house as opposed to going somewhere else. And the reason for that is that most people don't want to get in conflict when they're doing their crime. They want to dominate it. They don't want to, people to know what they're doing until either they're actually doing it or have the person or people occupying the house not know they're there. So having an alarm system, putting the signs out in front of your house that it's there, most crooks are not looking for conflict. So they may go somewhere else. It's not saying that's going to be 100% true, but at least it's one more thing that you can do to help the process of keeping something away from you before it even begins. Along with that, now we have a lot of technology that you can have 360 coverage on your house with cameras. You can have internal cameras in your house. So for example, if you have a split level house, if you're upstairs, you have a way of knowing what's going on downstairs. So you have another way of knowing what is happening in the environment around you. If you suspect something's going on, it's very easy to be able to look and actually see what's on the exterior of your house. It's being recorded. So for later analysis, you have a means of being able to show either the police if nothing happens and you want to report something, you have something to show to them. So early warning is critical. I can think back of the way we used to set this stuff up in a defensive position in a military context is that, we put out listening posts out in front of our positions. We may put ground sensors out there. We may have, if it's a big enough unit, we may put someone way forward of us, in a little bit more strength, either as a, combat outpost where you may have an entire platoon of Marines out there. And the whole purpose is that you want enough warning so that you can implement whatever plan that you have formulated. So, I'll leave that one at there. I don't know if you want to add something more into it about the early warning portion, but it's really critical for you to have some way of knowing something is going bad before it directly affects you. So you have that time gap to be able to start responding.
Yeah, I'll mention a couple of things here. And, with alarms, they found that alarms are so effective as a deterrent that they can even lower your homeowner's insurance. And in the podcast description, in the video description, I'll put a podcast that I did with a detective that's been overseeing home invasion cases for like 5 years. And he talked about an example where they had a street in their neighborhood, an entire block where every single house had an alarm on it except one. And guess what house got broken into? That one. And of course, that's just an example, right? That's just one example. But this, as a statistical pattern, alarms are such an effective deterrent that, again, having an alarm can lower your homeowner's insurance. And for people who don't have an alarm and for whatever reason can't get an alarm, you can always get alarm stickers that you put on your doors and your windows to at least create the illusion that you have an alarm, because that by itself can be a powerful deterrent. And let me talk a little bit about this issue with this early warning. We had a scene where we got a call, I think it was like 5 a.m, but the 911 call went out around midnight. And what had happened was the individual had broken in the front door. Now, very often home invasions happen during the day because, like you said, Lou, people don't want to conflict when they're committing crimes. So they're hoping that people aren't home. This is before all the shutdowns. But this was at night, a time when you would expect someone to be home. They also came in through the front door. Now, break-ins happen through the front door, but they'll very often happen through a door that is less visible to witnesses, so they're less likely to get caught. And when this person kicked in that front door, they had a Glock with a 30 round mag. And in Detroit, a 30 round mag is a hit. They had to kick the door several times. I saw that when I saw the door because it was kicked more, it was dented with more than one footprint. And what had happened was the individual who was waiting inside of the home had obviously heard the person kicking at the door, and they had time to get their gun, lock their gun out, and just wait for the person to come through that door. When they did, they were able to get a perfect center shot as the person was turning away. They caught him one time in the leg, and that's where the person became our client, right there in the front door. The point of all that, though, is that they had an early warning, so they had time to prepare for what was going on. They weren't caught off guard. So a lot of times the difference between success and failure is that difference between action and reaction. If you can be the one reacting first and forcing them into the disadvantage of reacting to you, that gap can be the difference between success and failure. So having that early warning sign is, or warning is absolutely critical, and alarms are a very powerful way of doing that. Not only as a deterrent, but to giving you that warning, and of course to get help on the way too, because we obviously want law enforcement to get there as soon as possible. So Lou, those are my thoughts about that. I just wanted to share that with viewers and the listeners. I think that's a really important point.
Sure. And if I can add one more thing into it, having a dog in the house is also a really nice thing to have, for those that can do it. For early warning, most dogs that I've had in the house, they get very protective of their environment because that's just the way that they are, particularly when I've had German Shepherds. And they let you know sometimes when someone's just walking up towards the door, because of course their hearing is, compared to our hearing is, night and day differences. Their sense of smells, they're just built to be able to do that kind of thing. And just a mere fact that if the dogs hear something that is abnormal, well, usually dogs do what they do best. They stop barking. And there's nothing to get crooks away from you. They don't like dogs because they know dogs don't have a conscience to biting them. And they have no conscience as far as if you want to come invade their turf, dogs are protective of it. And of course, the next thing in line is that they let you know that you need to be alerted to something going on. And like you so adequately stated, that there's sometimes a very narrow time element between knowing something is going wrong and be able to respond adequately to it to protect yourself. Because spontaneous incidents are usually when people get hurt or killed, it's generally in spontaneous things that they have to have such little reactive time to it that they maybe often can't even get a plan of, a planned thing that they have in mind, or even have been practicing to be able to actually do it, because maybe the time element has been so dramatically taken away from them that they just can't respond. So to kind of wrap early warning up, I would say alarm system plus dog gives you about as better way of knowing something's wrong there, particularly if someone starts kicking at your door at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and there's a dog in the house. They're going to be yapping to the point where they're going to wake up the neighbors next door, because that's what they do. So I think early warning is probably one of the more critical points that we could talk about.
And when it comes to dogs too, it's not so much that we have to worry about the dog being like a big German Shepherd where he's going to physically attack somebody. The deterrent with dogs is the fact that they attract attention. And the benefit with dogs is the fact that they attract attention so you have time to respond without getting caught off guard. So as an example, we actually had someone that tried to break into one of my homes. This is years ago when I lived in a different house, and they came knocking on the door. And what they do is they would go down the neighborhood and they would knock on different people's doors. And as soon as they came to our door, we had a little Shih Tzu, and he was small for a Shih Tzu. He was like a mini Shih Tzu, right? So cats would beat this dog up, right? He was so small. But man, of course he barks, right? Little dogs like to bark. So this guy went across the street, left our home alone, went across the street, knocked on the neighbor's door. This is like at 10 o'clock at night. It's not right for people to be knocking on doors. So we made a 911 call. Well, when the police roll up, as soon as they see this guy on the porch, Lou, they grab him and they immediately throw him down to the ground. Now, you know that it's not normal for police to just show up, grab a guy and throw him down for no reason, right? Well, it turns out there were a string of home invasion cases that was this individual. What he was doing was knocking on people's doors. Hey, my grandma lives down the street. She got locked out. Can you give me a screwdriver so we could get her into her house? The neighbor would, whoever lived in the house would give them a screwdriver, which our neighbor was actively doing when the police showed up. Then they would take the screwdriver, they would go inside the house and they would rob them with it. That was a pattern that was going on. But the only thing that got them to leave our house and go somewhere else was that little itty bitty Shih Tzu who was giving us warning that something was happening, and they don't want that. They don't want the attention. So they left. And, to go back to that example that I gave, one of the variables on that dynamic that was so important. So when he came through the door and she was already ready, as soon as he came through the door, she started breaking shots, which means now she's not the one reacting to him. He's actually the one that's having to react to her. And he couldn't do that quickly enough. And that's why he ended up on the ground and she ended up safe. And that's the dynamic that we look at with that early warning. We want to know that something's going on so that we have time to respond. But the next part of that, and we'll talk about at some point, is having a plan to respond. We don't want to wait till we're in the problem to solve the problem. We want to have solutions in place ahead of time. So if we're in that situation, we already have a plan to put into place. We already have a plan that we can act on. We don't have to waste time figuring out what to do. We've already solved the problem. We already know what to do. We just need a warning so that we can take that knowledge of what we're going to do and we can apply it to the problem that we're being confronted with. So I think a big part of this is not only having the early warning sign, but as Lou, I know you're going to talk about later, is having that plan in place for an effective response. So when you do get that warning, you already know what to do and your response is a lot quicker, a lot more effective. Does that make sense, Lou?
Absolutely. And this is a good time to lead into the next topic that we'd like to talk about. When all else fails and your house gets breached, in hours of darkness, lighting is going to be a critical factor for you to be able to gain the information you need to be able to know how to respond. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we have a house that is completely dark when we're sleeping and when we retire for the evening, then anything that we usually are going to do would have to be done in darkness, and we'd have to either introduce light there or at some point we need to be able to identify who we might be able to be dealing with. And this becomes really critical because one thing that we don't want to ever have happen in a particular response is not properly identifying someone before we open fire. For example, if we're introducing a firearm into this. So one of the things that we want to emphasize, and it's a topic that I know, in January, we're going to be running a low light shooting program in conjunction with a segment that you're going to be running about using sharp objects and using a flashlight as a impact weapon, is low light considerations and how can we avoid all the mistakes that can be made because we're not seeing the environment in a way that we can really process what's going on in front of us. So one of the things that we always recommend people to do is have sufficient lighting on in the house so that you would not have a problem identifying family members or anybody else, significant others, anybody else that may be in the house during hours of darkness, so that you don't have a problem identifying friend to foe. Now, this doesn't have to be eye-blinding light initially. This just has to be enough lighting to say that, yeah, that is my wife, or yeah, that's my husband, or yes, that's my, son, daughter, whoever else happens to be in the house at the time. So what we'd recommend doing is setting up a light system within your house. And it could be as easy as certain night lights or whatever way you want to do it. There's many ways of setting it up. But lighting is going to be very important to you if for some reason your house does get breached at some point, where there's doorways, even if you have an alarm system, someone might get into the house. And you want to be able to at least see who's there. And your lighting is going to play a very critical point. If at all possible, we would always want to set it up so someone is coming from a fairly well lit area into a darkened area, because now their night vision is going to be messed up and they're not going to see as well coming into a darkened area. And as we discussed before, sometimes these little bits of time are really important to the overall survival for an individual. So lighting is going to be critical. I know in my house, we have a split level house. So my entire downstairs area and the walkway coming up into the top portion of the house, the upper bedroom area, I can see anybody I want coming up there and know exactly who they are. So in my mind, I don't have to worry about mistaken identity. I'll know who's there just by seeing it. And I think this is something for people to kind of think about in formulating their overall defensive plan. In the military, sometimes we use flares, we use other methods. You know, now they have night vision to be able to see out there. This is all to give you a better ability to know how to deal with whatever you're seeing in front of you. So lighting is something to think about.
And lighting, of course, you can either have complete light where everybody's in full light, you could have no light, or you can stage light so it's to your advantage. And let me talk about this again to help people understand this from a tactical perspective. The number one tactic of a criminal is to catch people off guard so that they can win the fight before you have a chance to fight. The whole point is they want to win before you ever have a chance to mount an effective response. Well, when we're staging lighting in our home so that we can see them before they see us, we're giving ourselves that same tactical advantage. When you're the person acting, you always have an advantage over the person who is reacting. So, in the way I like to say this in my classes, is whoever is seen first is target first. So, if you have the ability to identify them first and then can take the appropriate steps to deal with them when they don't even, you're off their radar because they don't know where you are, you've got a huge tactical advantage because by the time they figure out what's going on, you may have, hopefully, the goal is to already have the fight won. So, by staging lighting so that we can see them before they see us, gives us that tactical advantage of being able to act before they had the ability to mount an effective response. And of course, the other really critical part of that is the identification. And I'll give a real brief story here. Lou, we've done a lot of shows with Joe Ferrera. He's again one of my few people I call teacher, my Mr. Miyagi, if you will, and he's a contemporary of yours, and all three of us are friends. And he had a scene where he worked for a police department for many years. There was a woman in the home, and she owned a gun, and she heard a noise, and she's in her room, and she's scared, and she's got her gun, and it was a house where they had a keyhole in the door, and she sees somebody looking through that keyhole at her, and she gets scared and she panics and she shoots. She actually shoots right where the keyhole was and hits the person right where they're looking. Turns out that was her sister. And what had happened was her sister, had free reign to come to her house. Her sister's kids were actually here because the woman who lived there was watching her sister's kids. What a tragedy this is. And so she came home, and the person who was coming over the house to pick up her kids, she was looking around. She didn't see her sister. So she was peeking through the hole to see if her sister was asleep because she didn't want to wake her up. The whole point of that is she took the shot without identifying the target. And that was a tragedy because on the one hand, you have a woman who just took the life of her sister who was watching her kids, and now her kids don't have a mom. And of course, there's a loss of the life of the sister. So we've got to be able to always make sure that anytime we project force, any type of force, we have to have 100% visual identification of what we're projecting force on. Whether we're shooting them, stabbing them, hitting them, we have to know for sure that this is somebody that we need to apply force to. And being able to see them and identify them is a really critical part of that.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Even rudimentary lighting gives you enough to be able to see maybe facial recognition of someone, or just being familiar with the person, you may see the way they walk, things of that nature. But for sure, it's a whole lot cheaper monetarily, and you can't possibly even fathom how much psychological damage it would be to shoot a loved one in your house or make that type of mistaken identity shooting, because that's something you have to live with for the rest of your life. All of this is prevented very cheaply, particularly with some of the systems that you could use with LED lighting and things that really don't require a lot of electricity to use. It's almost one of those things that you have to do. If you own a house, or even if you're renting a house or an apartment, it's really not that expensive, and we really recommend that you you use lighting to your advantage. I think I can start into the next topic here, which would be creating obstacles. And this is kind of once again one of the things that came to mind to me, like I say, years ago when I was starting to form either teaching this or just for my own purpose in the house, is that you want to make it difficult for someone to get to you. In a military context, we use all kinds of things. You use barbed wire, tanglefoot in it. You can do ditches so vehicles can't drive right up on your positions if you've got the equipment to do it. The point is that what you want to do is slow someone up to the point where it's very difficult, one, to even breach into your house, but you want to make it slow and you want to make it real noisy for them to do it. So one of the things that you could do, they sell all kinds of products you can use to put in the way if you've got sliding windows, which many of the houses, particularly around where I live, that's pretty much the way most of the windows open. Well, it's very easy to be able to block that sliding door or sliding window from actually being moved with something as simple as a dowel that you put in the runner. Something that would cause someone more time and maybe more noise to defeat it. There's other better ways that you can do it. There's a lot of places you can go to get really good quality stuff, or just even things you do with just drilling a hole in the ground and putting a nail in it to prevent a door from sliding. These are all things that you can do that are very simple and easy to look at what we would call a breach point, someplace that someone can get in and make it hard for them to get in. Doors that swing inward, putting door stops into them might be a way of also adding to the difficulty someone has of coming into your house. Any way you can harden positions to make it noisy and time consuming for someone to get through is going to work to your advantage when they're trying to get in. Doors, that don't have much protection on them may be easy to kick in. Well, there's ways of hardening doors to make it more difficult for them to be kicked in. There can be latches put on the top and latches put on the bottom that go right into the framework, so that instead of just kicking against a doorknob, now you're adding a lot more structural stability to that door. So if they're standing there and have to take 30, 40 seconds to try to kick through it and make all that noise, probability is they're going to go find some other place to go. Because again, my experience with working, I worked graveyard for 23 years. And one thing that I noted working there is once some crook is identified as doing something, the first thing that they like to do is run away. Because the last thing that they want to have happen is get caught. So if you have an early warning, as we talked about, you've got lighting running, you have a way of causing them difficulties to get in the first place, this works against them not wanting to waste the time because they have no idea that you maybe have already called the police. You maybe already armed yourself because you know that they're there. And in the mind of a crook, and what we always used to do is always put your mind into the enemy's mind to try to figure out, okay, how are they viewing trying to get to me? And if I were them, how would I do it? And when I put myself in that context, then it gives me a lot more depth of thought as far as, okay, then how can I prevent it? So make as many of these points to get into your house as hard as you can for them, so that you have more warning about them being there. So obstacles of any kind are going to be important. You can also do something that really is pretty simple. For example, in a house that has a two-story type setup where someone would have to actually come upstairs to get to where you are, putting something as simple at the top of that stairwell as one of those gates that we used to use to just keep the kids contained in an area. Now that might sound like something simple, but in the middle of the night, when someone is coming from below, having to try to get over it or disable it in some way, this causes noise. Noise gives you the ability to know something is there. It makes it harder for them to get to you, and it may make it more time consuming for them, which gives you more opportunity to respond. So anything that you can do to make it more difficult for someone to get to you is really critical. It goes beyond the depth of what we're talking about here, but we've done whole programs of the actual home defense where we integrate a whole plan of attack into it in response. That takes us to a whole different conversation. But what these things do for us is gives us the ability to implement whatever plan that we've formulated, because no plan can be implemented until you know it needs to be implemented. So if you're sound asleep and you don't even know someone's gotten in the house with you, what plan is going to work when next thing you know they're right by your bed pointing a gun at your head? Or if they're standing next to you and they have a tactical advantage, even if they're not shooting you, of being able to control you in some way or stop beating you up, whatever the case may be. So, to kind of sum up the first three things, early warning lets us know that they are there trying to do something. Lighting will allow us to be able to identify them. And the harder we make it for them to get to us, the more reactive time that we're going to have.
I teach a program online called Crime Prevention and Response. It's a live virtual program. And one of the things that we talk about that in class is that it's impossible to make a house as a structure. I mean, most homes are not going to be impervious to getting broken into. They're just not built that way. So the goal is not to make them in such a way that it's physically impossible to break into them, is to create a situation where the more time that the criminal needs, the more attention that they draw to themselves, the better chance you have of becoming aware of what's happening and then having time to respond. And again, one of the things I talk about is the more time you have to respond, the better chance you have of an effective response. So a big part of that is having a plan in place before you need it. But the idea there's anything that we can do to give us awareness and then time and then have that plan in place is a really powerful strategy. And of course, deterrent too, we talked about this also, about having the alarm stickers, having the beware dog stickers. But let me talk about one of these things that we can use to give us that warning to make our home a harder target, kind of like the gate that you talked about. And I do the same thing because I'll use gates to keep the dogs contained based on where I want them to be. But what's nice about that is if anybody breaks in, my dog's going to hear whatever gate they're trying to get through, even if I'm sleeping and I don't hear it, which means they're going to alert me to not only that somebody's there, but they're going to alert me to specifically where they're at. Another option you have is you can go online and you can buy these things that you hang off of a door handle. So if anybody comes to that specific door, it will make a sound that will alert you to exactly where they are. So even if you have a home alone, that gives you a general alert that somebody's there. You can create these door alarms that are very inexpensive that you just hang up there. So now you know specifically where they're at. Of course, that's another great thing about a dog too, though, right? If there's somebody in that home, that dog's not just going to let you know that they're there. They're going to let you know specifically where they're there. Because one of the most dangerous aspects about being in a structure is having somebody in that structure with you that means you harm and you don't know where they're at. The dog lets you not only know that they're there, but specifically where they are. And that can help a lot. Those alarms can help a lot, even if you just hang it off of a doorknob. So it could be on their master bedroom. You can take them with you when you travel to hotels. You can have it on the whatever doors you have as points of entry. So if somebody breaks in, you don't just know that they're there, you know where they are, and then you can respond accordingly. Those are all great things. So we talk about hardening a target, like you said, putting up that gate. So if they get through the gate, now I know not just that they're there, but I know where they are. That makes them attract attention. The point is, the more attention they have to draw to themselves, the more time it takes them to get to us, the better chance we have of an effective response. And I think that's really important, Luke.
Well, those are all great points. I think that would lead into something you had mentioned earlier about having a plan to respond to whatever event begins. I had an incident when I was working. We started with just taking a simple break with one of the deputies that worked in the area, because we worked very closely with the local sheriff's department, being a state police agency, and a call comes out of a home invasion. So we responded, my partner and I, because we had 2-man unit with the solo unit that the deputy was. And we had a canine unit that was nearby that responded with us. So the scenario was a lady by herself, husband's at work. It's about 10:30 at night. She's got 3 kids, small kids in the house with her, and 5 individuals come banging on the door. Well, when she looks through the peephole and sees that, she knows there's absolutely nothing right that's going to happen here. So she immediately gathers the kids, gets on 911. That's how we knew something was going on. And in the time it took for us to respond to get there, the front door was already breached. She didn't have a firearm, but she went to the master bedroom, and her plan was to go there, lock the door, and then she took her and the kids, crawled into the closet. So we show up, there's 2 lookouts, there's 5 altogether, so there's 2 lookouts outside, 3 of them are made entry into the house. And that's an important point, that anymore when we see these home invasions, usually there's more than 1 person involved in it. Well, it kind of developed pretty quickly. Because of the terrain, there was no way of them not seeing us. We got on foot and parked offset with the vehicles, but there was a point where we had to basically show ourselves to be able to get up to them. As soon as they saw us, one of them took off, and one of them just laid down on the ground because he had 3 guns pointed at him. Well, the guy that bolted, K9 went after him. He jumped up on a fence, and K9 basically jumped up, pulled him off the fence, and he was taken in custody. Now we have 3 people in the house we have to go after. Lady's still on the phone, so she's given us as much information as she can give us. Well, we confronted 2 on the bottom floor. They don't want to get shot, so they gave up. But there's still 1 remaining. Lady's on the phone saying she hears him in the adjacent bedroom right next to the master bedroom. So I was on point. I had my rifle, and I was able to get right up on the door. He didn't see it coming, and boom, lights in his face. He's like a deer in a headlight. He's another one, didn't want to get shot that evening, so he gave up. But for this instant, the plan worked to the point where she was lucky to have us respond in a very timely manner, because we got there really quick. The problem with it is that she didn't have a means of repelling him, meaning there's no firearm, there's no weapon involved in this. She's by herself. But there's only 1 very easy door to breach between, even though it was shut and locked, between the bad guy and her. So as a matter of a plan, it was a good plan to go to a prescribed place to go to, but the plan may have not been as good had there not been a response to her and being able to get these people before we got there. Because they were basically facing very overwhelming odds once we showed up there. But now, had this guy not been confronted by me when I did, he's seconds from kicking in the door to get in the master bedroom. Now, he might not know she's even there initially, but you would figure crooks think, well, where do you put jewelry? Where do you put some of the valuable things? It's going to be in a master bedroom. So, bringing this to a plan. A plan should encompass a whole bunch of things. 1, we talked about early warning. We talked about knowing who was there, and we talk about creating obstacles. Well, we're not going to talk about a firearm response to this during this segment, but we will at a later time. But the plan has to really be able to be implemented very quickly. And what we mean by that is that if whatever you're doing can't be done in a timely manner, then it's probably not going to be effective. And the plan has to include all these other things that we talked about, or else what is going to be a plan when someone's right next to your bed? Sometimes, we we have to bring this into it. A lot of times people may put their defensive firearm on a nightstand or something next to their bed. And at first glance, that sounds pretty good because you can get to it. But what happens if you have no way of knowing someone's there and they're standing next to the bed and you're sound asleep? Well, the plan you just formulated, which might have been, well, when I know something's there, I'll have my gun to be able to protect myself, just went out the window because you had no way of knowing that you're going to need it in the first place. And getting back to what you had said, Ian, about this time crunch, well, there's zero time when someone's standing next to you and you can't access the plan that you had. So if your only plan is have a gun on the nightstand next to you, maybe you have to look at doing something a little bit more, these things that we've been talking about, because any plan has to have time enough to be valuable or be able to be implemented. You know, in a military context where someone jumps in your fighting hole that you didn't know was there, well, that's kind of late in the plan because now there's things that can happen there that you may not be able to completely know. But if you have adequate warning and you've developed a plan, which is have that safe room or safe place to go, gathering the kids, whatever you have to do to be able to, create that safe place. That safe place might be you moving from your bedroom to wherever they are, and that becomes your strong point, as we call it, for your home defense. Whatever you have to have time enough to be able to do it. Because if the crooks have already got to your kids, then it's going to be kind of late in the game for you to do something about that. And the response, might not be as good, because what happens when all of a sudden you may show up with your gun, but they already have your kid in there, their kids being used as a barrier between you and them. So the point is that a plan has to have not only the opportunity to use it, but then your plan has to be something that's going to be feasible for the environment. So you have to develop this stuff. And then anybody that you have in the house has to know what that plan is. And then what you have to do with that plan, like you think of doing fire drills, and I'm old enough to know that back in the 50s and the 60s, we used to use the nuclear attack drills at school, going underneath your desk and all of this stuff. Well, think of it the same way. If you develop a plan in your mind, that's great. But if everybody else around you don't know the plan, what are they going to know what to do? And at the point where you need to implement it, that's not a point where you're going to be able to teach it to them. So once you develop this plan, whatever you develop, you need to make sure every family member in that house knows what to do. And even if they're kids, it could be something, they're probably asleep anyways, and you're going to be moving to them. But they have to kind of know that, if you see daddy or mommy, when it's dark out in the middle of the night, when we come into the room together, just initially be quiet. We'll talk, we'll tell you what's going on. But the point is that you need to not only develop the plan, but get everybody privy to it so it can be implemented very easily.
Yeah, kids really need to be brought into these plans, and they need to understand what their role is. And you really do need to practice it like a fire drill, because you can say whatever you want to kids, but when they're scared, there's certain instinctive things that they're going to do. So without getting into the weeds, because again, we can do this a lot with training, but when my kid was young, I used to say, hey, if daddy ever has to hurt somebody, in other words, I have to defend us, what I want you to do is go run and hide. And then I played little games with him where he'd actually go run and hide when I was doing like bag work or something like that. Well, what happens is if I was just to say that and I never actually turned it into a game, he probably wouldn't actually ever do that. But by practicing it, which to him was just a game, now all of a sudden you're creating a reaction that has a much better chance to happen when somebody's scared. And, we're not, like you said, this particular show, we're not going to be dealing with firearms as a response. We're going to do that in the follow-up show. However, I do want to just take a moment and talk to people here that you just want to be very informed and conscientious when you make a decision about what plans you have in place about protecting your home. Because the reality is, if you don't have a firearm in your home and you're not effective in using it, you could be in a situation where there is no effective response. of course, that comes with other things that you've got to consider too. Like now you've got to keep that gun secure so you don't have an accident where an innocent person gets hurt, but you still have to get to it quickly enough and it has to be there for you to get to for you to have an effective response. So there's a lot of education that goes in this process, but I just want to kind of nudge people that whatever decision you're going to make, you really want to be thorough and thoughtful about it so that you're making an informed decision and not ending up in a situation where you regret not being properly prepared. Because the truth is, again, if you don't own a gun, you just may not be able to effectively respond to whatever that threat is. That's why cops carry guns. They're responding to the exact same criminals that the public is dealing with, and they would never do that unarmed. And there's a reason why. So just be informed, make your decisions, and make sure whatever decisions you make, you're comfortable with them because you've done your due diligence to decide what steps that you want to take. And I will also say that even if you do own a gun, you still need to be prepared to have other methods of force because we don't all walk around with guns in our homes. Lou, you talk about a story one time where a guy came out of a shower and there was somebody in his master bedroom that had broken into his house. Well, most people aren't going to be wearing a gun when they're coming out of the shower. It's a reality of it. So we do need other ways to respond, even if we have a gun. Of course, if we don't have a gun, whatever those other ways are our only response. So let's talk about a couple different things in this regard about having an effective means of response. I'm going to start very briefly by saying, I don't care if you have access to a weapon or not. And when I say weapon, I mean any type of weapon, sharp weapon, impact weapon, taser, or a gun. Everybody needs to know unarmed self-defense because our body and our mind are the only two things that we take with us everywhere we go, and they are the fastest things that we can deploy. Everybody needs to know how to defend themselves without a weapon, period. If you don't do that, you have a gap in your preparation that may be a gap that you end up paying for someday. So I encourage everyone to have that basic level of training. But then I'll also say that for having a weapon is a tremendous advantage too, because we want to be able to overcome whatever disadvantage we're in, and a weapon can help us do that. And I would never talk about a scene unless it was for the purpose of education, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but just to give people a picture here, I've been to scenes where I've been to one scene where a 17-year-old girl was home alone and she was raped and killed. I've been to scenes where elderly people were horribly victimized and they were executed in their homes. The point is they didn't have a way to fight back. We need to have a way to fight back. And if you're that teenager and you're dealing with adults who are going to be larger, faster, stronger than you, if you're that elderly person and you're dealing with adults who are younger than you, faster than you, and stronger than you, you need a way to overcome that disadvantage. And for that, you need some type of a weapon. So Lou, let's talk about some of these options that people have other than a gun, because whether you own a gun or not, we need to have these other options too. And I'm going to kind of put things into two categories. I think we need to have weapons of opportunity, and then we can have specific weapons that we strategically place in our home. And let me talk about a weapon of opportunity here. This is something that has been in my family for probably 4 generations. It's the old-fashioned iron, right? But here's the thing though, I use this as a doorstop. Now, people can see that, but they're probably not going to associate it with a weapon. But if I've got to grab this and hit somebody with it, well, I don't think you can think of a much more effective weapon that you can shut somebody down with if you have to hit them to shut them down. This is a phenomenal tool. And simply by having it by your door and using it as a doorstop means you can get to it quickly and use it effectively in an emergency. Now, I'm not saying go out and get an iron. That's not the point. But there are things that you can strategically place in your home that people aren't going to see and associate as a weapon, but you can quickly get to and deploy. I'm going to take just a couple minutes to lay this out, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, Lou, to kind of expand upon it. But another thing that I like to do is behind the curtains in my home, I'll hang a baton, the old-fashioned wooden batons and nightsticks. Now, there's nobody that can see that because whether the curtains are open or closed, they're always covered by the curtains. But if I have to get to it quickly, I can't. So let me give 2 very brief examples of this. We went to a scene one time where a woman she's deceased, and she's actually sitting up with her head in her hands and her elbows on her knees. She's deceased, but in that position. There was blood on the floor, and the amount of blood that there wasn't consistent with a decomposed body bleeding. It was consistent with head trauma. We were called there for an overdose, but this looked like a bleeding from trauma. So we look around, and within reaching distance of where she is, she's got a bunch of candles that are sitting on a stereo that have a round base. And of course, I looked at her head. That was the first thing I did. And I see a bunch of round circles in her head where there was clearly impact. So the person who killed her grabbed those candles and they started hitting her in the head with it. The point is, there was an improvised weapon there that somebody could quickly grab and use. You want to set yourself up with things that you can quickly grab and use, but not things that somebody could look at and think to use against you. Let me give you my last example, and then I'm going to hand things over. I had a friend of mine. She had a ground floor entrance to her upstairs apartment. So it was her apartment. You enter through the door. She has her staircase that leads up to her apartment. Well, at the bottom of that door was a baseball bat that she just leaned right up in the corner. Now, there's no scenario where somebody breaks in, she's going to get to that front door before they do, because they're breaking into the door. Which means when they break into the door and she's upstairs wherever she is, they're going to see that bat right there by the door, go, oh, okay, great. Now I got something to go beat her up with. So we don't want to leave things out that look like weapons that people could use against us. That's why I like the nightstick that's hanging behind the curtain. I know it's there, but no one else knows it's there to grab to use against me, but it's strategically placed. So if that's the quickest weapon I can get to, I have something that I can quickly use and use in a defensive way. So weapons of opportunity, things that you can quickly get to effectively use to defend yourself, and strategically placed weapons that other people aren't going to see and think to use against you. And what's nice about nightsticks and various different things like that we can use is, well, we don't have to worry about securing those like we would a firearm. It's okay to leave something, a nightstick that's hanging behind a curtain where we wouldn't just want to leave a gun out, at least not if there were kids at home. And of course, I don't like the idea of leaving guns out anyways, because if you go to that podcast again where we talked to that detective, and I know I've been, I've working with law enforcement, this has been brought up before, where a criminal might break into a house with no weapons at all, sees a gun laying out, grabs that weapon. In one particular case, cops show up, he takes off down the alley. Now the cops are pursuing him, but the scenario is now he's armed where he wasn't armed before, because there was just a gun laying there that he could see and grab. So I don't like leaving any weapons out where people can see them and use them. I like weapons to be secured appropriately for what the weapon is, so that you know where it is, you can quickly get to it, but that weapon's not going to cause problems for an innocent person. And there are ways to do that. We just have to know what they are, inform ourselves, and prepare us ahead of time. So Lou, if you don't mind, kind of give your thoughts on that, and then maybe we can very quickly pick out different weapons that are common weapons that are not guns, that we could talk real briefly about the pros and cons of each of those systems.
Sure. Well, I think the baton example that you give is really an easy one to do, because a baton can be almost anything. You could just have a basic dowel and you have an instant baton. I do a lot of training with batons and sticks myself, because being in Korean martial arts, part of Korean martial arts is use of short sticks, medium-sized sticks. So it's something that I think you can utilize effectively, even with minimum training. And it's something that would be very easy to be able to get your hands on. I think one of the things I would encourage people to do is just take a few seconds when you have the opportunity. Look around your house, look around wherever you are right now, either viewing this or listening to it, and look around and say, what could I use here in a pinch where I have no other option other than going with, palm strikes, elbows, or whatever other means of unarmed combat I would use, that I could actually use as a weapon system when needed. And I think that's important, because when you start to look around you, kind of opens up the world a little to say, yeah, there's things that I could actually use here. As an example, from where I'm sitting here doing the video, at my fireplace, I have, those little implements that you use to clean it with. There's a little shovel, there's a little pick looking thing. And I say to myself, those are weapons that you could do some damage with if you had to really use them as a implement, as a last ditch, because Of course, we're not talking firearms, which is really a big equalizer in any kind of scenario you get into. But if I'm standing near that and I need to get to something in a hurry, that's just a matter of plucking it out from the little carousel that they're all positioned on. And now I have an impact weapon that can do a lot of damage. You know, having been involved in law enforcement, I've had to use batons to keep from getting hurt. And I know that anything that you can swing can be really devastating to people that are trying to hurt you. So without doubt, that's a very easy thing that you can use. Something that's very easy that I'll hold up is just a plain old pen. I can take pens like this and put them in different places all over my house. And what is it? It's a pen that's positioned who's going to pay attention to that as a weapon? But I know with some of the excellent things that you're going to teach in that virtual program that we run and things that you've done in the past with some of your programs, we can teach people to use something like this very effectively as a last ditch method of taking care of yourself. I mean, heck, as we're taping this, you've got one right on your body. It's there for a reason.
Right.
That's why it's there. It's there because no matter where you are, it's there with you. This is pre-planning things. You know, we talked about planning. Well, my plan is anywhere I got in the house, I've got something to get my hands on. Now, I don't leave weapons out when I'm not physically present in my house. If it's not on my body, it's in a safe. But when I'm here, I don't have to worry about that. There's no kids in the house. My wife isn't an issue as far as worrying about her inadvertently getting their hands on it. But whether I'm upstairs, downstairs, whatever I'm doing, I have complete access to that level. However, if you don't, then you need to think about other things. Okay, so we talked about fireplaces. You've covered using batons. It doesn't take a lot of training time to teach people to use a short stick. Okay, people get the impression because sometimes they see some of these beautiful arts, like some of the Filipino arts that use sticks. They're doing all kinds of really neat movements with it. Well, to be honest with you, when you pick up a stick, there's only a few movements that you really need to learn to be effective with it. I've taken some of my students when we're doing conventional martial arts training, because as I say, I've been in martial arts for 57 years. I humbly say I'm a grandmaster. I'm a 9th degree black belt. And I've taken some of my students to give them non-conventional things that they were training and introduce them to sticks. And in a very short period of time, you get them very effective in using it. It's not going to take years of training. You're not looking to be pretty with them. You're learning basic striking. And it's enough to sometimes make a difference. In addition to that, for anybody that walks, having a walking stick is something that when you're not walking outside with, when you take it in your house, it's another implement you can use in order to defend yourself. It's, in essence, it's a long baton. And we see these batons of that length being used at riots, things of that nature. When police units are deployed to some of the recent events, you can see them with a little bit non-conventional looking baton, and that baton is actually a long stick. You can have the same thing with the walking stick, and when you're done walking, place it where you might be able to get to it if all of a sudden you're confronted with an intruder, and if you're in a common area of the house. Another thing, again, because it's something that I've dealt with within the martial arts community and training, is a cane. Canes are one of the best non-defensive tools that you can get. It's legal to own. I can walk with a cane outside when I go walk. I can have it in my house with me. I could have it anywhere I want. And it's another implement that you can use other than having to go hands-on with someone with just an open-handed skill technique or unarmed combat thing.
Hey, Lou,
So,
I'll go even further to say that a cane is probably the only weapon that's actually protected by law. In other words, not only can nobody restrict you from having it, but as an example, like Joe, again, our friend had to go through the airport security there. and he had his walking stick. They had to put it through the x-ray. They had another walking stick there that they could give to people while their walking stick, their cane was being x-rayed. It's actually protected by law that if even they're going to take your cane away for even a moment, they have to give you a replacement cane. We can't do that with guns, or I got to take your gun for a second, but you can hold on to this one, right? So it really, nobody can deny you access with a walking stick, no matter where you go or under any circumstance, because it's considered something that is used as a disability. And so it's something that's really protected. And that's unique. I don't know of any other weapon that's protected to that degree. Nobody can restrict you access to anywhere with a walking stick, because it's considered something that people need for medical reasons.
Oh, exactly. And in particularly for maybe someone that does have some kind of a physical um uh, thing that's going on, where they may have difficulty walking and they actually have to have that to assist them. You know, some people may not really understand that, yeah, this is a good viable weapon system. We teach classes in how to use that stuff. Why? Because it's effective and it's, like you say, legal. You can take it anywhere that you want and no one can really take it away from you. The point is that, you can oftentimes use very common things as tools. I mean, again, because of the amount of time I have in martial arts, we go back and do a lot of study of some of the ancient things. Look at some of the in the Orient and in some of the countries there, when they were disarmed for some reason. Well, they learned to use farm implements as a means of defense. All of this stuff is very, very easy to not only have available to you, but it's highly effective. I mean, you can't, a baton is a baton. Swinging something, whether it's a 34-inch Louisville Slugger or it's a baton, police type baton, or any kind of other implement, it's all the same principle of operation. In other words, if you can use one, you can use the other. You can look around your house, you may have a trophy or something that's kind of like a weighted implement. Well, if I can swing a baton this way and I put a trophy in my hand, I can swing it the same way. I don't have to retrain anything. It's just using a different tool in my hand. I mean, this might sound kind of out there, but as a defensive tool, how many pots and pans do people have in their house? I guarantee you get one of those cast iron things and you hit someone with that cast iron pan, stand by, you're hurt. And anything that gets hit by it, you're hurt. I mean, these are all things that people sometimes don't think about. But in a pinch, again, we're not talking having access to firearms at this point. But when all else fails, most things you can grab and hold on to can be used in some way as a weapon. And it's just a matter of using your imagination and spending maybe a little bit of time training with it. I can take a pin and I can set something up that I want to hit, and I can practice swinging that thing a few times just to get the feel of it. Well, you know what? I don't need 100 hours of training to be able to swing a pin. To interject something I thought was kind of funny. The Gurkhas are part of the British Empire, if you will, and their military. But they have their legendary Gurkha knife. And some guy that was dealing with them wanted to get training in it, and the Gurkha wanted something from him, and the Gurkha says, okay, yeah, fine, here's what you need to do with it. Swing it here and swing it here. And the guy is kind of like dumbfounded, because he's expecting some big, training plan or big deal about it to be able to use it. And the real issue is that it is that, but the guy behind it is dedicated to using it and is going to use it very aggressively and doesn't mind using it. And that's a person that you don't want to be across from, because the only way you stop people like that is usually you got to kill them, because they're going to be devoted to what they do. Okay, you put your pan in your hand, same thing. Doesn't take a lot of training to make it work, but you're dedicated to using it. You're going to aggressively using it, and then you're going to use it to the point of death because you're not going to allow that person that you're using it against to kill you. Anybody can do that. It's a mental thing. There's very little physical training stuff that you need for it, but it's an up here thing. So, not to draw it out, but to make the point that, most of what we're talking about starts up here. It's thinking about what you're going to do. And then you're filling in the blanks with all these things we've been talking about as we talk about hardening the target. Well, you're the target. You harden everything around you via the way that you've laid it out. I can put a pan anywhere in the house. I could put one next to my bed if I don't have a gun. All of these things are available to people when you look around right in your own house here. So I'll leave it at that to put it back to you. But I think these are all good things that people can think about laying out a defense.
So simple skills that you can apply effectively that have a meaningful chance of stopping the threat. And that's kind of the three-part equation that we're looking at here. And this is really important. And a lot of this does boil down to mindset. Let me give a couple real quick examples here. When my son was real little, I grabbed him on the wrist one day. He was holding a toy. I grabbed him on his wrist and I said, okay, what is it you would do if somebody grabs you now? And he puts down the toy and he goes to hit me. He goes to do a palm strike. And I go, no, son, you have something in your hand. Hit them with the object in your hand. Not only do you have a better chance of hurting them, but you have less chance of hurting yourself, because no matter how you hit people, there's always some risk that you can hurt yourself in the process. So the idea there is we got to learn how to think that way, how to take advantage of things that are that are opportunities around us, because we always want to take advantage of whatever opportunities we can. There's no such thing as fighting fair. There's only winning or losing. We want to take advantage of whatever opportunities we can that will give us the best possible chance of shutting down the threat as quickly as possible, so long as our use of force is justified under the circumstances. That's kind of the total equation that we're dealing with there. But I want people to understand that home invasions, and we don't give, we're not attorneys, we're not qualified to give legal advice. Laws vary based on wherever you are, and it's your obligation to know and follow the law. But here in Michigan, where I am, a home invasion is a lethal threat. And that's a really important issue, because you need to understand what level of danger you're in. So the one thing that I really want to caution people with any weapon that you're selecting for home defense, it has to be capable of making a meaningful difference. So there's a lot of improvised weapons that we can use, but sometimes the weapons that people plan on using are just not effective tools. You have to be able to evaluate from the context of, can this cause enough injury that it can take away somebody's ability to act on their decision to hurt me? I'll give you an example. There's a famous shooting that was caught on video at a school board meeting. And at some point, there was a woman who walked by the hallway right where the shooter was, and she saw him, gun in hand, threatening the board members there. And she had the courage to respond, but she didn't have the means to respond effectively. At least the choice she made was not an effective response. She grabbed her purse and she swung it at him. Well, her particular purse was simply not an effective weapon. It didn't cause him any injury at all. It didn't change the equation. And only by sheer luck did that individual not respond by hurting her back. And she was able just to walk away. She got really lucky. But the point is, we need to have an effective means of response. So whatever weapon we're using has to be an effective weapon. So walking sticks a lot of times are very light aluminum. Well, if you're hitting somebody with light aluminum, you're probably not going to hurt them. Now, if you are, if the aluminum breaks and you got a sharp end that you can stab them with, that can be effective. But just hitting them with hollow light aluminum is probably not going to hurt them. So I'm going to go real briefly over some impact weapons that I think are good. A T-ball bat is a wonderful choice, I think. Baseball bats are great, but I think this is easier for people to use and a little quicker for people to use. You can use it with one hand, you can use it with two hands, and you can use it on either side. It's very light, but it's solid enough that when you hit somebody, this is capable of causing a significant injury. And so long as your use of force is necessary and justified, this is a tool that can give you a good chance of stopping a threat. A walking stick can be effective, but only if the object itself is dense enough that when you go to hit somebody, it can cause a significant injury. Handheld flashlights are great, and this is one of the things that we're going to cover in our course, Lou. Not only something that you can use in conjunction with shooting, but it's something that you can use as an impact weapon. And of course, you would use it the same way that you would use a pen. There are some things you've got to modify, but the concepts of how you use them is the same. And that's important too, because you already brought up a really important concept, Lou, that self-defense skills need to be simple to be effective. We want simple skills that have a high chance of success. So we can use a flashlight in a very similar way that we can use a sharp weapon. That means we have fewer ways of doing more things. We have simple skills using weapons that give us the best chance of success. So let's go into some things that are specifically designed to be weapons. And I'd like to cover two real quickly here with your perspective, Lou. That is pepper spray and also the use of a taser. Because again, we're going to save firearms for our next show. When we talk about pepper spray, I want to throw a couple of things to consider out here. If you're in corrections, they use the foam or the gel. The reason why they do that is because they're all in close quarters. And if you use fog, you're putting a lot of chemical in a contained area, and everybody's going to get affected by that. Also let you know that in one particular case, Joe responded to a scene where he was a police officer on the city level. He's a deputy now. And the individual ended up spraying somebody with pepper spray, and it was the fog. It filled up the house. It cost them $5,000 to decontaminate their house after using that pepper spray, because it soaks into everything, and you've got to get all of those chemicals out, or you're just going to constantly have that irritation there. So the gel, the foam, what they use in corrections, can allow you to use that product on somebody without contaminating the environment in such a way that you're being affected by it too. The problem with that, though, is that the fog is really the most effective way to affect somebody's eyes and respiratory system, which are the two primary goals that we're looking for when we talk about using a pepper spray product. But if we're looking at it being part of our home defense, then we want to have something that's not going to cause that problem. We want to have something that is going to allow us to use it on somebody without causing that spatial that contamination. So foam and gel are probably the best things that you're going to have for home defense. Lou, you mentioned a pen too, and I want to mention that, you know, one of the things that we do is we go into people's workplaces and we go into their homes, and we will, in their homes and workplaces, develop a defensive strategy. And I work with a lot of high-risk students, and all those people that are being actively threatened, so they need training to stop a threat that is probable. And there was one woman who had an estranged person that was trying to hurt her, and she was trained to use a gun. She had a gun there that she can use for defense, but she also needed something that she could get to quickly. And you mentioned, you know, we don't want to just set a gun on their nightstand next to us, because if we're sound asleep, if they're able to get into that room with us, they're not going to leave that gun there. They're going to take it away so we can't use it, and they're going to use it against us. So what I trained her to do was to leave a pen on the nightstand next to her, and the gun was very close by, but concealed from view. If she couldn't get to the gun, which he couldn't see, he didn't know it was there, she could always grab the pen and start stabbing him with it. And that could create an opportunity for her to get to the gun if she couldn't get to it right away, or maybe hopefully solve the problem with just the pen. But the idea there is we want weapons that we can get to quickly. And one of the ways we can do that is to have things that are in immediate reach that don't look like weapons, like a pen. But Lou, let's talk real briefly here about, we'll start first with pepper spray, or OC spray, oleoresin capsicum spray. And then once we're done with that, let's talk about tasers, and then we'll put a final thought on that. And then we'll get everybody ready for our next show in the series, which is going to be how to use guns in home defense.
Well, sure. We can start with pepper spray. You know, one of the things that I'll add into what you were saying is that you have to be real careful with pepper spray in the way it may affect you in the course of you using it for defense. I've been at scenes where at the end of its use, you've got everybody there rubbing their eyes because they were affected just as badly as the person that it was used against. So you got to be real careful in the way it's employed. The other thing that it can be effective, but I always thought of a plan B when it don't work. And the reason why is because I've seen too many people walk through it. Someone will use it and it's not working. So then when it don't work, now what do? So already just the mere fact that you're using it is telling you that you're pretty close to whoever you're using this with. And I've seen crooks just cover up and just come straight at the officer. Now, that's okay when you got 2 or 3 other cover officers around you. Everybody's got a gun, everybody's got batons, everybody's got things that can really hurt people with. But at 2 in the morning, if you're using that in your bedroom and it don't work, then what are you going to be doing? And remember, it's something that and some people, it might be overestimation of their ability to do certain things. But remember, when you're caught in a spontaneous thing where all of a sudden, there's someone there that is looking to get their hands on you, or it's a home invasion thing where they're going to try to secure you so they can do whatever they want in your house or to you, they're going to be pretty wired up, and they're going to be pretty, in the terms of, being 0 or 10. Well, they're usually at about a 10 when they're doing these things. They're already primed. You may be coming out of a deep sleep, getting up, trying to grab something and deploy it against them. And it's very easy at that moment to get overrun and overpowered. And if that spray doesn't immediately work on them, and it's been my experience that with the real hardcore people, they tend to work through things a little bit more. You get some people, sometimes we get an active resistor trying to get out of a vehicle or something like that, and they may get a spray. Most of those people just give up and you're yanking them out of the car. But the ones that are really determined, sometimes they'll walk through whatever you're doing to them. So I would say, if you're going to use it, understand that there's a potential of it not really working. And when I was running force on force training, we had inert ones that would shoot water, and it worked exactly like regular pepper spray, except of course it's just jetting water out there. I can't tell you how many times when people try to use it in a scenario where they no longer have control over certain elements there, where they actually miss the whole spray. And you see the jet going right by the person, and then next thing you know, the role play is right up on top of them, and there's no time to get the batons, there's no time to do nothing, and now they're having to rely on personal weapons. Well, not everybody that gets attacked is going to be 6'3" and weighs 230 pounds. If you're not of that description, the probability is most of the people that are attacking you at that point are going to probably be bigger, stronger, or more, even if it's just being more amped up, if you will, are going to have a lot of advantage over you. And you miss with this thing, now they're in your face, and the first thing that people are going to try to do to you is get their hands on you and throw you to the ground and get on top of you. That's what we see in most of the fights where someone believes that they're more powerful or bigger or stronger. They're grabbing on people and they're trying to put them to the ground. And then they jump on top of them, and it's either to control them or to beat them while they're on the ground. That's you in your living room. In one of the previous videos that we showed, this happened to a woman in a home invasion where you could see this exact thing happen to her.
Lou,
Guys,
that was one of our real encounters, our videos. That was actually, I think, our first episode titled Home Invasion. I'll put that show in the show notes. I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about active protection and how we kind of came out at the same time without knowing about each other, doing similar videos. Ours were called Real Encounters. And that's when we did that, Lou, was back then. And I'll put that in the video description and in the podcast description for people so that they can go watch it themselves. I'm sorry, Lou, but you're bringing up such a great point. I want to let people know they can see it for themselves.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. That is a beautiful illustration, and I would encourage people to watch that video because it really ties into what we're talking about here. But I've been in a lot of fights. I mean, just like I know you have. And the one thing you don't want to have happen is get thrown to the ground and have someone bigger, heavier, stronger on top of you. That is a real disadvantaged position. And let's put this into context of where you might do this, because it ties into our main topic today. It's at night, it's dark, you just wake up, someone's there, you spray this thing at them, and next thing you know, it don't work and they're on top of you. That's where you're going to be. And what are you going to do then? And you see, this is the type of planning that you just have to have when you're planning defensive things, because this is reality of what happens to a lot of people. And even when you have a plan, as we used to say in the Marine Corps, no plan survives first contact, because the other guy's got a say in what's happening there. So things can, even with planning, you have to be always ready for that plan B. And when you're talking about sprays of any kind, I've seen them fail. I've seen them work and I've seen them fail. I've seen all of us that were involved get affected by it. That's why, like at our academy and in most of the programs you go through, they expose us to it so you understand how it feels like. I remember they had it in liquid form and they put it on Q-tips and just rub it right underneath your eyes, which is really a direct contact to you. And God, you find out really quick that, yeah, when you get hit with it, it's definitely something that's going to affect you. But what you don't want to have happen is for it to splash off someone and get back into you, or you miss completely, like I illustrated, when it gets in a force on force mode where you've got really someone that is actively coming at you, you could end up in a problem with that. So, that would be my caution about sprays. They can work, but always be in the frame of mind that it just might not work against the person you're doing it to.
Yeah, Lou, you said a lot of things that are so important. When I do classes on using spray, it's funny because I'll have people aim for a target. I'll wear a mask and I'll have them aim for me and right over the shoulder. And people are always surprised that they miss. Well, it's not an episode of The Walking Dead. And that's just me standing there and them missing, right? And that almost everybody that takes that first shot with the spray is going to miss. Now they can, quickly kind of get back on target, but that person's not going to stand there and go like this, right? They're going to go they're going to cover up. So the reason why that's important is I'm not a real fan of the gels and the foams, because you have to get it directly into the eyes for it to be effective. And people are going to cover up and they're going to shield that from happening. The really only context that I like pepper spray for is when you're using the aerosol, the fog, and you're aiming at the center mass like you would a firearm, because it doesn't matter what they do, you're enveloping them in this aerosol that's going to affect the eyes and the respiratory system as much as possible. But then the sympathetic effects on people vary so much that I don't feel that pepper spray is a reliable means of incapacitation, but I do think it can be a reliable means of distraction. What that means is I would never rely on pepper spray to take away somebody's ability to physically hurt me. And you see this in subject control and law enforcement. They spray somebody and the person still continues to fight with them. What I see pepper spray having the most probable chance of success is when you're using it as a means of distraction. So let's say that you've got a healthy jogger and they're capable of running, and they had that pepper spray that canister with them. Somebody attacks them, they spray the person, they get it in their eyes and the respiratory system. There's a momentary distraction where they may be physically capable of fighting, but they're not physically capable of focusing on you because they're having a hard time seeing and they're having a hard time breathing, which means they might not be able to breathe enough to physically exert themselves. Well, that gives a healthy jogger a chance to sprint out of there. And in that combination of using the spray and go tactic, using a distraction to create a chance to get away, that can be very effective. But as a means of incapacitation, what if you don't have the mobility that you can quickly get away? And now you're stuck there with the person who you sprayed. You might have reduced their ability to focus on you, but you haven't necessarily taken away their ability to hurt you. Which means that they're grabbing onto you and throwing you to the ground. Well, how well do they need to see you to control you or punch you? Because they know where you are. They're physically on top of you, controlling you. And the problem is the gels and the foams, they're really minimizing that effect to affect the respiratory system, and you have to directly get it into the eyes to affect the eyes. I don't like OC spray, pepper spray, as a means of home defense. I really only like the fog product, the aerosol product, when it's used by somebody who's physically capable of getting away and is using it as a distraction to create that chance to get away. Never in a home defense scenario where this is your last stand. I mean, we want to get away if we can, even if we're in our home. We want to be separate from we want to separate from the threat. But if you can't get away, if you're stuck there fighting them, you need a weapon that is going to make a meaningful reduction in their ability to function. That means you have to have the ability to injure them to the point where they're not physically capable of acting on that choice to cause you harm. The example I gave earlier where that lady swung a purse at the guy. That purse was not capable of causing the injury necessary to take away his ability to hurt her. We need something that is going to hit hard enough or stab deep enough that it's going to make that meaningful difference in their ability to function. So Lou, I agree. I'm not a big fan of pepper spray products for home defense. I think pepper spray products are a niche product that can have a role to enhance people's safety. But even like we talked about in prisons, you've got these teams of correctional officers that are going to extract somebody from a cell. They spray them and then they rush in and a bunch of guys overpower them. That's not self-defense. There's a very big difference there. They're not relying on the spray to solve the problem. They're just helping. They're using the spray to make it easier for them to accomplish what they want to accomplish, which is with several large guys that are going to physically take that person into control. Now, let's talk about tasers. People a lot of times think of tasers as a non-gun gun, and that's not accurate. And think about it, and I'm not, we want to know the advantages and the disadvantages of any weapon system that we're going to consider using, because nothing is 100% effective and nothing is 100% ineffective. Lou, I also teach a virtual class where I go through all the different weapon systems and I give an honest evaluation of what the pros and cons are so people can make an informed decision on what they want to do. But when we talk about tasers, excuse me, if you could think about this, Lou, imagine that I was going to sell you a gun for self-defense and it's only got one cartridge in it. That's it. You got one shot to stop this person. You'd probably look at me and go, Ian, I'd like to have a couple extra rounds just in case I miss, in case the rounds don't effectively shut them down. Well, what a taser is, when you're talking about tasers for self-defense, is you've got one cartridge, one chance to deploy the prongs that are attached to the wires that are attached to the battery that you're holding onto that sends the electrical current that's connected between the two probes, which is what causes the muscular incapacitation when it causes that contraction. You got one shot, but you not only have to hit them with that one shot, you got to hit them twice with that one shot. And you don't just have to hit them twice with that one shot. You have to hit them with the prongs far enough away and in medium enough tissue that you have a good connection. So it's not that people don't effectively use tasers. People save their lives with any conceivable weapon that we can think of. And we always want to take advantage of whatever we can that will give us the best chance of success. But I want people to think about the fact that nothing is a guarantee. And some of the choices that people might pick, they might pick with false expectations and not be prepared for the reality of what the limitation of those systems are. So Lou, can you talk a little bit about both the pros and the cons of a taser when we talk about using it in the context of home defense?
Oh, absolutely. Well, tasers came in to law enforcement after I retired. But I train agencies now that have them in wide use. And of course, we see a lot as far as, videos that we see all the time that come up with different incidents that happen in the law enforcement community to get kind of a good idea of what, how they're being used and what effect they're having. What I would say is that you got to remember that as a law enforcement tool, whoever is armed with it, that is a full-time peace officer that's out there, whether it's a city police officer, state police, or deputy sheriff, in conjunction with having a taser on their body, they've got a lethal tool on them, meaning the handgun. They have other things such as batons, whether it's a collapsible baton. They may have a spray. In other words, they have an array of tools that if one fails, that there's something to fall back on. So if you're using a taser as a primary tool with nothing else to fall back on, well, then you better make sure it works for that one instant that you're deploying it. Because if it fails, what are you going to do? Now, by and large, it's a good system as far as reliability, but we've seen failures of it to function. We see failures of it to put people down when they get hit by it. Some of the things that you've just alluded to. We've seen people that have been tased, go down, get back up, and then the fight's back on. So, it's like every tool that we use, if I were using it and it was effective from a home defense standpoint, not necessarily me, because I'll fall back on other tools if I were using it, that would be I would use it much the same way as you just discussed about the distraction to be able to get out. Because you don't know how long it's going to affect the person. You don't know how long it's going to be before they regain whatever capacity they need to be able to continue what they're doing. So if that's the only thing that you've used against them and that's the only means of defense, then I would say if it did work, the next thing you need to do is go somewhere else, because you don't know what's going to happen there. And again, from a civilian home defense thing, you don't have the same obligation that we did in law enforcement to take people in custody. Your goal is not get hurt. So if it means you use this thing to put someone down for that temporary time that they're out of it, that is the prime time for you to, leave, get on 911, get the uniformed people there to be able to either take the guy in custody or at least stabilize what's going on there. But you got to be real careful when you use these things. We've seen people that have basically not really been affected by them. It's not saying necessarily something bad against the tool itself, but you've indicated partly how it can fail to really work. So, I don't trust too many things, and I always want a plan B if I use something, because I've had instances where, to be honest with you, even in the field where the use of the baton didn't work, but I was in a less lethal scenario because it wasn't a scenario where you could apply lethal force. In a reverse way, downloaded to use in open hand techniques to be able to end it. Because you always got to be ready for those things. There's few things other than a headshot that you can say that you can completely rely on. And even then, people get shot in the head and still do things. So I guess my point is that no matter what tool we're talking about using here, there has to be that plan B response to whatever goes there, because things happen in the real world that are almost sometimes unbelievable, but they happen. So that would be my take on using tasers, is have a backup plan, because if it don't work, you need to be able to do something different.
That plan B is really critical, because like I said earlier, nothing's 100% effective or 100% ineffective. We always need to have that plan B. And part of that critical core set of plan B is having those unarmed skills, those ability to fight without the use of a weapon, because the weapon itself may not work. And the unarmed self-defense skills, depending on the situation, can be the very fastest thing that we can deploy. So we always have to have that backup. We always have to have a plan B, and in that bucket of plan B, we have to have in there that ability to hurt somebody with learning how to defend ourselves without the use of a weapon, whether it means attacking their eyes, whether it means using simple skills like palm strikes or elbows. Those are all really critical things. And I agree with you too, that when we talk about tasers, like pepper spray, what I teach is spray and go. And tasers, it's the same thing. It's tase and go. But for me, when it comes to home defense, I either want to shoot them, I want to hit them, or I want to stab them. So we talked about what these different options are because these are options that people consider when they're making their own decision what they want to do. But for me, I would always guide people to those core three. We hit them, we shoot them, we stab them. Anytime that force is necessary and justified, those are the three reliable things that we can fall back on to defend ourselves when we're in our home. You know, pepper spray and tasers when we're out in the public and we have the ability to quickly get away, they can play a role. But when we're talking about being in our home, you know, in the same concept there applies. If I can spray and tase and go, I want to do that. I want to separate from the threat. It doesn't matter where the threat is. I just want to get away from them, whether I'm in my home or out of my home. But if you're trapped in your house and you don't have the ability to get away, if we have to shut down their ability to function, well, tasers and pepper spray really are more about having a chance to get away. We need a way to stop somebody from being able to hurt us. To do that, and my approach to that is we hit them, we shoot them, or we stab them. That's my perspective. So when we talk about these different weapons, those are the weapons I would guide people to. Each individual has to make their own choice. Whatever choice you make sure it's informed, make sure you're being honest, and make sure that you understand the consequences, which means one, if the weapon system doesn't work, that's a consequence that you need to be prepared for. But you also have to be prepared for making sure that you use the weapon system in a way that's appropriate. Because, you know, if you shoot somebody, you stab some, you hit somebody, and that's not justified, there are consequences to that too. And again, we're not talking about guns today. We're going to talk about that in our next show. But guns, unlike all other weapon systems, you're not just responsible for the person that you're dealing with. You are now responsible for every life within the range of that bullet. And bullets can travel long distances with lethal potential. There's a huge amount of responsibility that goes into that. And if we're going to own a gun for home defense, for personal defense, we have to make sure that we live up to that responsibility. In fact, Lou, you know, I just started a new series called New Gun Owners Academy. It's going to be a video series, and that's completely free. It's a public service, but that's for people who are, all these folks now have guns, but they all don't know a lot about how to be safe and responsible and effective with those guns. So that's where we're going to walk through all the fundamentals, safe gun handling. We're going to talk about the anatomy of a gun. We're going to talk about the anatomy of a cartridge. We're going to talk about how those two things work together. We're going to talk about how to maintain our guns and properly store our guns. So for anybody out there, if you know anybody or if you are somebody who is very new to guns and you want to be safe and responsible, that New Gun Owners Academy, those videos on our YouTube channel, those are there for you guys. Again, it's a public service. Lou, do you have any closing thoughts? And then we'll prep people for our next show, and we'll put this one in the books.
Sure. Well, I would just say, you know, for setting up your house, we discussed earlier in the broadcast about early warning systems, about lighting your house, creating obstacles, making it difficult for them to get to you. Please consider those things. We talked pretty much in depth about alternative weapons, but I like the way that you've presented it, saying that that's pretty much what they are. You know, when we talk about a home invasion scenario or someone's broken into the house, well, some of the things we talked about would be those last ditch things that we'd want them to rely on. But it'll be important to tie what we've just done here with the next segment that we'll run at a later time, to where we talk about a more lethal response to what happens there, so that it gives you a better chance of winning and better chance of surviving the encounter if you're in this type of scenario. But I think thinking about some of these issues is probably the first step to getting the best plan possible. But when you finally make all your decisions about how you want to handle your particular scenario in your house, then make sure that you've implemented the plan, you've rehearsed the plan, and always be ready to have some kind of a fallback from whatever your initial plan is. Because you want to have what we call defense in depth. You want to be able to have more than one thing to rely upon in the process.
I think that sounds great. I could not have said it better. Lou, thank you very much for being a part of this show. Thank you for your public service, both in the Marine Corps and also all your time with law enforcement, and also as a trainer where you're helping other people. And for those of you who are watching, for those of you who are listening, if you feel that this is a valuable resource, you can help us help you and also help other people too. We need you guys to get us into the search engines, because until that point comes, we're only helping the people who already know about us and are coming to us for our content. For us to help new people, then we need you guys to help us. And the way you do that is simple. You subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, like the video, because that gets us into the search engines too, and then share the video with other people. If you like our podcast, then, like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, leave a review for the podcast, share the podcast with other people. And then always go to the video description and the podcast description, where we have information there for you pertaining to the show, including a link, livesafeacademy.com/connect. When you click on that, it goes right to our website. You'll have access to all of our podcasts, our videos, our articles, our in-person classes in the Detroit, Michigan area, and our live virtual programs that you can participate in from anywhere in the world, from the comfort and convenience of your own home. Guys, thank you for giving us this time. If you have any comments, leave it in the comment section. Always feel free to contact us. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe.